Hi, Hirsch Sai here, reporting from Auckland. Today is the 7th of April 2024, and the topic for today, or this particular talk video, is certainly an interesting one, and one I think that we all come across and even debate, definitely at some point, probably even multiple points, as it really concerns many of us, and that is, the old if you like, the old debate on tenants versus landlords, landlords versus tenants, however you like it, and what should we do about the two, how we should treat the two, if we should even treat one better than the other, things like that, and this comes to say when it, as this comes to making laws. Attitudes, general guidelines and practices. It comes down to sort of all those things. But I think, yeah, certainly with making laws, and people have, said that, oh, we need to protect tenants more. There's more of them, and they don't have any property themselves, things like that. And they otherwise they'd be living in their own property if they could afford one, but they don't, so they have to rent someone else's property. And they tend to be those who are less wealthy, whereas landlords in general, I know it's a pretty big generalization, but they, do own property, and they tend to be people who don't always have to rely to on someone else's property to rent. They'll tend to own their own home and even have investment property on top of that. And in general, they tend to be sort of more wealthier people. Of course, that's not always the case, but that's sort of the the general, if you like, the general part of it. That's the generalization. That's pretty much what to expect a lot of the time. When you look at landlords versus tenants. But yeah, how do we treat them? I honestly think that we should treat them equally, and definitely in terms of, guidelines, practices, laws, all those things. I really think we should treat them equally. I can sort of understand some people saying, oh no, we should actually treat tenants better than landlords because, tenants tend to be less wealthy and all that. Or we should even treat landlords better than tenants because don't forget, landlords, they have the wealth and therefore, they're the ones who actually provide housing. And if you're talking about private landlords, then they tend to provide a lot of housing no matter where you look. And the only other person or entity who can provide housing, if not them, would be, of course, the government. And the government may not always be able to provide sufficient housing where private landlords, say, fall short. Um, and it's very easy to say that well, you could argue that yes, private landlords actually are more important than you think. Not all of them are evil, people who just want to keep do absolutely nothing and keep just jacking up the rent, with their poor tenants, are just subject to pay no matter what, and that they can do nothing about it. Of course, there's a few landlords out there who unfortunately are like that, but not all of them. But I can sort of understand people even favouring landlords saying, you have to treat them right because they're the ones who provide the housing, they're the ones who own the property, and if you make things harder for them, then chances are there'll be fewer rentals on the market. And because some landlords will not expand, they will not create more rentals. Some landlords will pull out of the market altogether, and other landlords who other say potential landlords, people who would have entered the market, have decided not to. And this is a very interesting story, especially for right here in New Zealand, because that's basically what happened in the last few years when you had, I actually remember back in March 2021, basically 3 years ago. I still remember it was 27th of March 2021 because it was just such a big event. I remember the date. And, the government at the time here in New Zealand, the Labour government, actually announced that because of the housing market being so crazy and housing in general, being so unaffordable, what they did to try to curb that is that they actually removed the legal right for landlords to deduct their interest for tax purposes. Basically, the interest that they pay on their mortgages was no longer tax deductible. And this was actually a really, really interesting story because I've never really seen anything like it at all, or even heard of anything like it at all. So, landlords meant that they would have to pay tax on basically almost their gross income, not their net income. They could subtract from the rental income things like maintenance, insurance, property management fees, body corporate fees, ground rent. They could subtract those sort of things, but they could not subtract mortgage interest. So they would have to pay tax on that almost a gross rent because the interest on the mortgage tends to be the highest expense for a lot of landlords. So they'd have to pay tax on that almost like a gross rent, and then after they pay tax on that, they would have to pay their mortgage interest. So it was a very odd law, and of course it got a lot of backlash and a lot of criticism. And as you might have expected, because it became so much harder for landlords to, have investment property that's stacked up, that gave them a return at the end of the day. And don't forget, giving them a return is important because otherwise, why would they invest in property in the first place? And then you wouldn't have as many rentals. Because suddenly, without the interest being tax deductible, virtually all investment properties were, cash flow negative, meaning that they actually lost money at the end of the day. Not only was there no profit, they were actually running at a loss. And unless, of course, you bought the property with cash or you bought it mostly with cash, and that's not the case for many landlords. Maybe for a fortunate few, but not the case for many landlords. Many landlords buy using a mortgage. So what happened actually it was quite so many potential landlords did not invest in property. They did not enter the market. Some current landlords basically left the market. They would either move into the investment property if they only had, say, one. If it wasn't stacking up, they might be forced to move into the property themselves, and therefore it was no longer available for rent. Um, and then you had a lot of current landlords who would not expand either, who would not buy more investment property or develop further investment property, which of course is good because it adds to the housing supply. So as a result, you had fewer rentals on the market. And I think some other landlords who decided to stick it out would of course obviously when they could increase rents to help with that. So as a result, rents went up because a lot of landlords were running at a loss, so they had to increase their rents in order to for their rentals to survive. And secondly, because there were fewer rentals on the market, with fewer landlords coming into the market, some leaving, fewer landlords expanding, you had fewer rentals, and therefore the rent went up again. If you like, it theoretically went up twice. So actually, the very people that the government at the time in New Zealand were trying to protect, if you like, tenants, the poorer middle class, who pretty much are the people who rent property, whereas you could say sort of the upper class people are those who tend to sort of own the property and they who are the ones who are really landlords. But what actually happened ended up hurting the very people the government at the time tried to protect, the poorer middle class, the tenants. So it ended up hurting not only landlords, it ended up hurting tenants, sometimes even more. So obviously it wasn't a good thing. It didn't go down very well, and now there's now a new government here in New Zealand that got elected in I think it was October last year, and they did pretty well with being elected in the sense that they got many more votes than the political party that was in government at the time. And the new government are now bringing back that interest deductibility in proportion, but certainly it's a good thing in terms of just correcting the problem that was created. So it's just sort of I know I'm going on a bit, but it puts things into perspective. You sort of do have to be careful with this. You can't just blame one party over another, say the tenants are the problem or landlords are the problem. Both are equally important. Both, I would think so. Both, yeah, really are equally important, and both need each other. And um, and I think that really needs to be considered hugely when creating laws and guidelines and general practices. And I would honestly say tenants and landlords, I think we should treat them equally. And if anything, if you want to really take care of landlords, I would say you take care of landlords by taking care of tenants. In that respect, obviously, yeah, take good care of tenants. Make things better for them, so they can rent properties, and you want to introduce incentives, if you like, or whatever it is that makes it easier, so they do rent properties and they take care of those properties and they pay the rent on time, and that's obviously what a landlord wants when trying to find the right tenant for their property. That's exactly what they want. A tenant who pays the rent on time, takes care of the property, and hopefully stays for the long term on top of that. So, if you take good care of tenants, in terms of, the condition of properties, and, also regulate to an extent, how far or how often rent can be increased, but don't go overboard like with that case of completely removing the ability to deduct interest for tax purposes, removing interest deductibility, which is what happened here in New Zealand. Don't go overboard like that. That was huge and just completely drastic, dramatic, just too big. If you do it subtly and if you do it cleverly, and if you really think about what you're doing, you can make it better for both. Treat both equally, but also remember that you take care of landlords by taking care of tenants as well. So I know that sounds like putting tenants first, but really you need to consider both, and you need to also remember that they really are very much interdependent. They really do depend on each other. And yes, we should definitely treat them both equally. And really, if you want to take care of one, you need to take care of both. So take care of landlords by taking care of tenants. Take care of both of them and treat them equally. That is definitely how I'll do it. Thank you.